listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 130 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good brother, good friend, and the gentleman that runs our Twitter page. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 130 of the DCAU Review.
That's right, we're back for the final week of October. Happy Halloween, everybody. And we are, of course, reviewing the spookiest thing we could think of this week, the first two episodes of Young Justice. It's almost like we didn't think this out that much. But yes, I'm very excited to be here. As we mentioned last week, a lot of people have requested that we review this show, going back to some of the early days. It was one of the first Elseworlds things that we saw get requested, so very excited to finally get to talk about these two episodes, Independence Day and Fireworks.
That's right, and as you said, Liam, Young Justice, it has quite the cult following, and as we do with every one of our Elseworlds episodes, we'll talk a little bit about the series itself and some of the history of it, since we are introducing a new version of the DC universe here and talking about it. So excited to do that today. And I know that we'll have the official IMDb synopsis to sort of introduce us to these two episodes, which originally aired actually as a single pilot named Young Justice Independence Day, all the way back on November the 26th, 2010. So actually, Liam, if we had planned it right, we kind of did plan it. We're coming up here on the 10-year anniversary of this Young Justice debut. Of course, that was a standalone sort of movie pilot that they released, and then the series itself kicked off later in January of 2011 on the Cartoon Network. But do you have any memories about Young Justice? Anything that we usually like to share personal thoughts and feelings about this? This was a little bit beyond the scope of my time. Maybe I had kind of gotten out of superhero cartoons for a little bit. I was definitely more into what was happening live action around this time. And I think I've expressed before, I've never actually had cable before. So again, this being on Cartoon Network, my only exposure to this, I think, was when it was streaming on Netflix. I watched maybe these first two episodes and maybe one additional episode after this, but I never really got into it. Do you have any personal anecdotes about Young Justice?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching, I think I did watch this premiere in November of 2010 when they aired it as a movie. I had kind of I was such a huge fan of the Teen Titans cartoon, which of course had finished up in, well, I think the final episode aired in 2006, but it aired in reruns for years after that. And between that and, of course, you know, the main DCAU shows, which you and I talk about every week, I think this just being its own thing, like, I respect that, and we'll certainly get into it, but for whatever reason at the time, my being, whatever I was, 17 at the time, this one, just for whatever reason, didn't grab me much at the time. I think also because when it aired, I was working a retail job at the time. I wasn't home a lot. It aired, I think the new episodes were airing on traditional Saturday morning time slots, and there weren't a lot of repeats of it, and so I didn't get to catch a lot of the new episodes as they aired. So it was just kind of one of those shows I saw on occasion and kind of caught up with when I could, but yeah, it's and in some ways I think that's fun because for both of us, we kind of got to go into it with a little bit more fresh eyes because we don't necessarily have that nostalgia blindness on us with this one.
With that said, yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. With that said, like I mentioned before, this has developed quite the cult following, I would say. Yeah. A lot of rabid fans of Young Justice. I think it has run. Its original run was what, 2 seasons or 3 seasons?
Mm-hmm.
2.
Yeah.
And then since then, there was an additional season that came out at some point. Right, we're up to 4 seasons now.
So the 4th season's currently in development and will be coming out, I would assume on HBO Max. We know it won't be coming to the DC Universe app, so...
R.I.P.
Yes. So I believe it will be... It definitely is coming. It's currently in production. But yes, so 3 seasons have currently aired. The first 2 aired on Cartoon Network. And then the 3rd season did air as one of sort of the tentpole shows of the first year of the DC Universe app's launch. So yeah, like you said, it has a huge following. It was developed by Brandon Vietti and Greg Wiseman, who have both done a lot of work in animation, and they both had a hand in the Under the Red Hood animated film, which is very beloved. Of course, we reviewed that. You can hear our review of that back in the archives at DCAUreview.com. And of course, the name Young Justice itself is based on the name of a comic book from the 90s that focused on... it was, for whatever reason, they wanted to get away from the Teen Titans branding. They kind of let the Titans all grow up and be adults at the time, but they still wanted to have sort of a young teen hero group, so they called it Young Justice, with the idea that this one was sort of more in direct supervision of the Justice League.
Yeah, I remember that too. If I recall, that was Robin, Superboy, and Impulse, I think, in the comic. So this iteration, this version of it, also, by the way, I did not mention, but this episode specifically is actually an Emmy award-winning episode. The lead character designer, Phil Bourassa, and I apologize if I'm in any way butchering that, but he was the actual character designer for this. He won an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation for this episode, and as I mentioned, he was in charge of sort of the character design. And doing a little bit of research, it's interesting. He had done some early work with DC and actually took part in some of the development for Batman Mystery of the Batwoman, which of course takes place in the DCAU. And then, so he then went and did some work for some other companies, and then he ended up coming back. Bruce Timm had him come back and do some work on one of the Wonder Woman films, direct-to-video Wonder Woman films. And after that, he stayed on and did the actual character designs for this episode. So, you know, when we get into talking about some of the visuals and animation, we'll have some more to talk about there. But let's go ahead and jump right into our IMDb official synopsis to get an idea of just what this episode is about.
That's right, and as mentioned, this is a 2-parter, which means I have 2 synopses to read.
Oh, yeah.
And these are for the episodes Independence Day and Fireworks. Both were written by Greg Wiseman. Part 1 was directed by Jay Olivia. Part 2 directed by the great Sam Liu, with music by Dynamic Music Partners, and both parts animated by MOI Animation Inc. And those synopses read as such. 3 teenage sidekicks decide to investigate a fire at a genetics laboratory. There, they discover a plot to create a clone of Superman. And for part 2, Robin, Kid Flash, and Aqualad are captured, and only Superboy, the telepathically controlled clone of Superman, can free them. As they struggle to reach the surface, they must do battle with the transformed scientist known as Blockbuster.
Well, there you have it. Those are pretty good, actually, I think.
Yeah, I think so. The way part 1 opens, we get these like 4 little vignettes of Batman and Robin, Green Arrow and Speedy, Kid Flash and the Flash, and Aquaman and Aqualad, all handling different ice-related villains. And then they're all sort of having dialogue with each other about how all the sidekicks are really excited. We keep hearing this phrase, "Today is the day." And as they all arrive at the Hall of Justice, they're told that they're going to be inducted as full-fledged members of the Justice League. But the sidekicks sort of quickly find out that that's not really what's happening, and that in fact Speedy, who is he's sort of, I guess, drawn and acted to be a bit older than the rest of the sidekicks, and he feels very slighted by it, and he's telling them, by the way, this isn't even the Justice League's real headquarters. They have a floating satellite in space where they actually go to meet and discuss all this stuff.
That's it? You promised us a real look inside, not a glorified backstage pass.
It's a first step. You've been granted access few others get.
Oh, really? Who cares which side of the glass we're on?
Roy, you just need to be patient.
What I need is respect. They're treating us like kids. Worse, like sidekicks. We deserve better than this. You're kidding, right? You're playing their game? Why? Today was supposed to be the day. Step 1 in becoming full-fledged members of the League.
Well, sure. But I thought step 1 was a tour of the HQ.
Except the hall isn't the League's real HQ. I bet they never told you it's just a false front for tourists and a pit stop for catching Zeta Beam teleporter tubes to the real thing, an orbiting satellite called the Watchtower.
I know, but I thought maybe we could make an exception. Or not.
You are not helping your cause here, son. Stand down, or...
Or what? You'll send me to my room, and I'm not your son. I'm not even his. I thought I was his partner, but not anymore.
And so Speedy storms out, and the rest of the heroes are the young heroes are left on their own devices as the Justice League go to deal with these, with some sort of big world-ending type threat. But meanwhile, there is also mention that there's a fire at a local laboratory called Cadmus Labs. And,
Say what?
And there we have our call to action, Cal.
Well, actually, you know what? It's funny. If you think about it, cloning is a little spooky. Like, there's a little spookiness to it, you know?
I think some of the character designs, which we'll get to in visuals, there's some spooky nature. I'm really turning around on this. This was the perfect episode for Halloween.
Well, it also ties into the fact, we reviewed a few episodes of Justice League Unlimited this month. Obviously, we talked a lot about Cadmus and Cadmus's play in there. So, yeah, the fact that this clearly features Cadmus, I think that played in very well to it. But yeah, so we learned that of course, at knowing that name alone, we knew that there was going to be something not above board happening at this Cadmus facility. And as you mentioned, we learned that the young members of the Young Justice that are left there, which end up being Robin and Kid Flash, who I found it hilarious that one of the running jokes in the episode was that nobody understood or remembered what his name was. In fact, at one point, somebody calls him Speedy and says, well, no, that's Green Arrow's sidekick's name. And somebody says, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that was good.
Which I thought was really, really good. But so they find their way after talking amongst themselves and sort of bending the rules and saying, well, the Justice League said to stay here and not help them with this other thing that they were called off to, but we'll go investigate this and figure out what's going on. And upon the investigation, they begin and this is actually a bit of a showcase for Robin, and this is Dick Grayson. We get confirmed later on in the series, I believe, that this is Dick Grayson. So Dick is sort of modernized a little bit. He seems to be very technologically advanced, seems to be quite obviously a bit of a hacker. So we find out that he's able to kind of hack into these systems and figure out what's going on. And he finds an elevator that leads down 52 flights, Liam. And we get the DC's favorite number there of 52. So 52 flights, and on their way down to this level, they begin to run into these strange creatures who we soon learn through some exposition and dialogue from a few characters that these creatures are, well, they're a little bit unique.
Yes. So yeah, they kind of combine a couple different things here. So in the comics of the 90s, when this version, the Connor Kent version of Superboy, was originally created, he came from this Cadmus Labs where they had all these strange genetic creatures. His sort of mentor and friend and sort of part of his supporting cast was some of this Cadmus crew. We see the superhero Guardian, who's also I guess superheroing doesn't pay the bills, so he also is the chief of security at Cadmus. And then he has this sort of strange devil-horned telepath called Double X that in the books was sort of one of Superboy's mentors and friends. And we see some of those characters used a little bit differently here. They're all sort of working at the behest of the leader of this facility, a guy named Mark Desmond, who, of course, in the comics would become, and in fact in this show, becomes the Blockbuster. And sort of, they went with the very classic origins of him being sort of this mad scientist. And But in here, they're also using these creatures called genomorphs, which themselves seem to be clones or made up of some of Double X's powers that they say they're for like instant telepathy. It's like a communication system, but in reality, these little small genomorphs are also controlling the minds of Guardian and anyone else, Superboy, the other scientists working there, anyone that Mark Desmond needs to do something. And once you know it later on, though we don't find their identities out yet, we find out that Mark Desmond himself is a small player here, as he is answering to this mysterious group, which we will come to find out is called the Light.
3 sidekicks, Robin, Aqualad, and Kid Flash, breached security. They found and released the weapon, the Superboy. Of course, the clone is under our telepathic control and, as ordered, turned against his would-be liberators. The 3 are contained, and we don't believe the League knows they're here. What should I do with them?
Clone them. The substitutes will serve the light, and only the light.
And the originals?
Dispose of them. Leave no trace.
Yeah, so they're the ones, obviously, that are kind of in charge of everything that's going on here. They seem to be the one pulling the strings. They keep talking about, what I forget what the nickname that they gave Superboy was. The not the experiment, but something like that. He has a very
weapon, I believe.
The weapon, yeah. So they keep alluding to him, and through various hacking means, the members of, I guess, the preliminary members of Young Justice here, who we have are, Robin, Aqualad, and Kid Flash, discover there's this super secret project all the way down on level 52 called KR. So they need to figure out what it is. So they work their way down there, and upon entering, they find out that KR is actually a capital K, small r, which of course is the periodic table denotation for Krypton. So they put 2 and 2 together. That, and if you didn't get that right off the bat, there's a giant Superman logo emblazoned on this guy's white jumpsuit. So they kind of figure out pretty quickly that there must be something going on here with Superman, and more exposition is given, and we find out that in fact there is a cloning process happening of Superman, depending on who you ask. Superboy himself says it is for the purpose of, if case something ever happens to Superman, or in case something needs to be done to Superman, and he stops, quote unquote, following the light. So we learn very quickly here that unfortunately there's something devious happening here, and Superboy does his best to sort of dismantle them as they come in. Despite the fact that they're trying to liberate him, he sort of does his best to dismantle them, and the Young Justice members become captured as we kind of round up with episode 1 here.
Yeah, that's kind of your cliffhanger for the first part. And again, of course, this aired as a 44-minute TV movie the first time, so there wouldn't really be a cliffhanger so much as a commercial break here, but yeah, I think that's interesting there. That's when we jump into part 2. Superboy, they have Robin, Aqualad, and Kid Flash all locked up, and Superboy's just kind of staring at them, and they start to talk to him and start to figure out that, like, he clearly wants to go out and explore the world, but isn't being allowed to. And they ask him, have you ever actually, like, seen the outside world? And he said, like, I've had images of them downloaded into my brain or something like that. But you can tell that he isn't a drone, he isn't a robot compared to some of the other genomorphs and things that we see in these episodes, which seem pretty much to just be mindless drones that live to serve either Double X or Mark Desmond. And Superboy clearly is kind of wrestling that with himself, and finally, towards Aqualad is able to kind of get through to him and just say, hey, like, just give us a chance to help you, and we'll figure everything out together. And he ends up kind of breaking free of that influence and is able to free them. And that leads to, right as it seems like everything is going well, and Guardian is telling them, you guys can go, I'll wrap things up here. We hear Mark Desmond make a mention of going to collect something called Project Blockbuster, which in fact turns him into the Blockbuster. And we do in fact get a big knockdown, drag out supervillain fight to end our first episode before the Justice League arrives. Too late to really help at all, but they arrive, and we get to see probably the most interesting part of the end here is seeing Superman's reaction to learning that there's like an autonomous clone of him walking around, and sort of his general like unsureness and sort of wanting nothing to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you mentioned it too. There was a slight plot twist in that we found out that Double X was in fact trying to help Superboy escape, essentially.
That's right, yes. And we find out he actually set the fire at Cadmus originally to draw them here. And actually in part 1, you see he is like standing in an elevator long enough for Aqualad to see him, which gets them to chase down the elevator shaft. So yeah, that's a good point to mention. Yeah,
he says that Superboy is going to do what the other genomes couldn't do, or the xenomorphs couldn't do, and he's going to be their leader. He calls him brother. So he really looks at him as if, so yes, these are creatures that are clearly created in a lab, but it is an army full of these creatures that he, Double X himself, may or may not be a descendant of, or the father of, basically. So he does call Superboy brother, so he's in somewhat related to all of these creatures. So he wants him to have the freedom and the autonomy to make a choice. So at the moment where he asks him to make the choice and he selects freedom, I thought that was really, really great.
Perhaps for the sake of all xenomorphs, our brother Superboy should make up his own mind.
It was you.
Yes, brother. I set the fire and lured your new friends down into Cadmus. Woke them when they were in danger.
And guided me. Why?
Because you are our hope. The Xenomorph hero. You will blaze a trail for all our brothers, showing us the way to freedom.
But you're right. Then the I think rivaling that as far as interesting as Superman's reaction once he arrives on the scene and he sees Superboy with the S emblazoned on his chest, and clearly there's a genetic similarity in appearance. So he clearly recognizes a younger version of himself, and this being a clone. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see them interact, and Superman is maybe a little less than warm towards him, I would say, maybe putting it nicely.
Is that what I think it is?
He doesn't like being called an it.
I'm Superman's clone.
Start talking.
Yes, for sure. And you could tell, like, certainly that the Superboy, certainly to this point in the series, is still very new and sort of has this aggressive tendencies to him anyway, and he's sort of very combative when the League first shows up anyway. But then, yeah, on top of that, they do have this moment, as you mentioned, where he kind of shows off the S symbol and kind of smiles at Superman, and Superman looks back at him almost like a little bit disgusted by it all, and like really concerned and not exactly sure what to make of it all. So that is kind of an interesting wrinkle that obviously plays out over the rest of this first season. But yeah, that is an interesting way to kind of, I think, to give us this jumping off point for what will be the rest of the series. We get the core members of the team. Of course, at the very end of the episode, we're also introduced to the fifth member, that being Martian Manhunter's niece, Megan, Miss Martian, who certainly is one of the breakout characters of this series later on. So yeah, you kind of get the basics of the team, the building blocks of the team put out here, and then you have a little bit of a call to action. You understand by the end of this what this is going to be. Basically, they are going to be sanctioned to go on missions by the Justice League, but it's going to be more stuff like what they did with Cadmus, and that it's going to be a more like covert team where they can kind of send a smaller group of these heroes into places that maybe the big giant group of Justice Leaguers that we see arrive wouldn't be allowed to go, or wouldn't be able to go in without being noticed.
And we get a sort of cliffhanger and sort of the ominous foreshadowing of what the main baddie is going to be, or this sort of, ironically, this sort of shadow work behind the scenes and the puppet masters, and that being this mysterious group called the Light that have taken notice that these small heroes are now being sort of officially deputized by the Justice League and are going to be doing their work, and that the Justice League isn't afraid to kind of put these young heroes in harm's way. And the Light says that they're going to continue to use that to their advantage. So we kind of are off to the races after this, I assume. So, so I guess we can talk about our scores here. I think overall, we always talk about it when we do pilots, Liam, that it's very, very hard for a show to jam-pack everything into your opening episode here. You have to introduce characters, you have to introduce plots, you have to introduce subplots, you're telling people who everyone is and revealing their skills and which versions of these characters you're about to watch and why you should care about them. So it's always a heavy load to bear here when it comes to introducing characters in a pilot sense. I think they do a pretty good job, and I think they definitely benefited from having an hour to do so. I cannot imagine what would have had to have been done to try and jam this into a single 22-minute episode. So this is a case where we've talked before in the past about wanting an episode to be a little bit longer so it didn't feel as rushed. I still feel like there's a lot in this episode.
Yes.
It's very, very busy. It's very, very jam-packed. And I appreciate that they didn't bog you down necessarily with introducing who Aqualad is, since he's maybe not as well known, or which Kid Flash this is. I think the opening scene did a great job of sort of setting up these preliminary players and who they are. With that said, there's still a lot in this. I felt like the addition of Blockbuster at the end sort of felt like a tack on that was like, I don't know.
We need somebody to punch.
Right, exactly. Which I appreciate, because it was a little light on action. And there's a lot of tension in the episode, but light on action at times. But for all those reasons, I gave it a strong but not perfect 7 out of 10. What about you?
And I gave it the exact same score, a 7 out of 10. I think we get a little bit of who each character is, more so Robin and Aqualad, I think, in this episode. Kid Flash is kind of more there for a little bit of comedic relief, and as you mentioned, there's some jokes about his name, and then him sort of, and for a lot of the episode, they even kind of mention it near the end that they're been in such confined, close corridors that he hasn't really been able to be that much help,
right,
in the episode, which I appreciate, because they at least justify. It's always tough in these team shows. We talk about this a lot with Justice League or JLU. To come up with a reason why Superman or the Flash or Wonder Woman can't just solve everything for you.
Right.
Why you need an entire team of people. So I think they do a pretty good job with that. But yeah, I think from a story perspective, we know that Robin's very impulsive, and he's very good with computers, and he's kind of just this weird. He's just a little weird. He's a little off, this version of Robin. We're introduced to him by him. He's cackling off screen before he appears, and then he repeats that a couple more times in the episode, and we'll certainly get into that in voice acting. But
yeah, he's a weird amalgamation, it seems, almost of the two Robins that we are kind of familiar with. That being, he's younger. He's not the Dick Grayson that we're used to, because we've obviously had the older versions of Dick Grayson. Even if you go back to Super Friends, that Dick Grayson was an older Dick Grayson. So we're maybe not familiar with that Dick Grayson character as the younger Robin, which may be why it seems off a little bit. But he's also definitely different than the portrayal that we get of Tim Drake in the DCAU. So it's not that character either. And it's definitely very different from the Teen Titans version of Robin. So it's very unique, and I totally get what you're saying. It's a little bit off. I totally get that.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job, though, of showing Aqualad as sort of this born leader.
For sure.
Because there's multiple times where he's sort of being the one being like, hey, you left those guys on the roof. I had to rescue them. And Robin being like, oh, yeah, I knew you got it. And then there's a couple other times where Aqualad is kind of the one that steps up and comes up with plans and everything and the way they all kind of work together in the end to take down Blockbuster is really cool. So, yeah, I think it's a good job. Again, you're juggling a lot. I think it's good that they didn't also try to shove in Miss Martian and Artemis, who of course become part of the team later on, or more stuff with Speedy. I think this was pretty jam-packed as it was, even with the 2 episodes, as you mentioned.
I agree, yeah. And Miss Martian, I mean, I will say that Miss Martian did feel like that could have been saved for another episode. It's kind of a weird way to end this, and maybe just introduce her at the beginning of the next episode instead of tacking it on at the end of this episode. That was an odd choice, I thought. But yeah, overall, it was enjoyable, and 7 out of 10 from both of us is certainly a respectable score. All right, Liam, let's move on to visual and animation. We've got a lot to talk about here, as we already mentioned. This is certainly worthy of some praise, especially, and deservedly so. Obviously, if it won an Emmy, we weren't the only ones to notice that. Obviously, this is a very different animation style, certainly more akin to that of the direct-to-video DC films. More of a traditionally, it's not anime, but there's more of an anime influence, I would say, in this than the traditional, DCAU or maybe what we've been used to in the past. What are your thoughts on animation visuals?
Yeah, I think they're very well done. I think, again, the way we're introduced to all of the what appear to be our 4 main characters before Speedy quits in those 4 little sort of vignettes to start the episode, I think are really cool. You get just like a really brief overview of what they can do, what their skills are, and who they are. Like you said, there's not a lot of hand-holding of trying to explain like the origins of Atlantis and the hierarchy and Aqualad or where Kid Flash got his powers, or we don't go over Robin's origins or anything like that. It's pretty much just, this is who they are. You know who Batman and Green Arrow and Aquaman and the Flash are. These are their sidekicks. Even if you don't know them that well, that's kind of your brief introduction. And those sort of quick action beats I think are a good way to do that. And then, I think the standout pieces for me, I really like the way Aqualad's powers are visualized. When he uses these, I guess he can control water, which I guess is that hydromancy, I think that's called. And he can also put some kind of electrical charge into it, but he has these tattoos up and down his arms and back, and when he's using his powers, they're black, but then they start to glow blue, and it looks like it sort of comes from within and then sort of shoots out of him.
He has sort of Eskrima sticks too, doesn't he? Like he has electrically charged.
Yeah, he has like these 2 handles, and depending on what he wants to form the water into, he makes them into maces, he makes them into swords at one point.
There's an electricity element to them as well.
Yes, he can do some sort of electrical charge as well, because twice in the episode, once when he's fighting the genomes, he just electrifies some of them, and then later on he gets the Blockbuster to basically stand in a large trail of water, and he just touches it, and it begins to electrify.
He tries to use it against Superboy as well, to little or no avail. That, I don't think we mentioned that in plot, but the part where as the Young Justice break Superboy out of his pod, and then he sort of battles them, that fight is actually a pretty interesting visual in and of itself.
Yeah, I think, because he kind of comes out arms swinging, guns blazing there, and goes right after Aqualad, and we see Robin and Kid Flash first try to kind of muscle him off. Of course, that doesn't work, and then it's sort of a divide and conquer thing where he keeps knocking one of them back, and then Robin throws gas in his face to try to throw him off, and then Aqualad seems to be really the only one who can actually hurt him or kind of go toe-to-toe with him from a strength standpoint. But yeah, the way that sequence is put together with him just sort of being this out-of-control super strong kid, and them still trying to learn how to work together to take him down is really well done.
Yeah, I agree. I also had noted the entrances. Of course, this is a show that's going to be focused on the side, quote unquote, the sidekicks, and it's funny because that's used as sort of an insult throughout the episode that they don't want to be known as sidekicks, and the introduction of these sidekicks, each with their own, with their hero. Batman's entrance, of course, extremely cool, and the cape flailing out as they battle Mr. Freeze, and I thought that was a visual that stuck out. I had also mentioned Aqualad's water manipulation. That's certainly visualized a few different ways throughout the episode. As far as the character designs themselves, though, since that's the Emmy award winning thing here, I thought it was interesting. I doing research on this episode, the character designers were determined to kind of do a little bit more realistic functionality to everything, and that comes out a little bit, I would say, in Robin, especially. As we mentioned, he's the hacker, like he's very electronically advanced when it comes to things here, and that comes out. He has those traditional Robin sort of, I don't know, are they pouches or there's little square things on his gloves and
Yes.
shoulders that I think first were introduced in the new Tim Drake costume. But there's some actual functionality in there. There's actually wires that come out that he plugs into the computer, and there's sort of a holographic images that pop up over his glove that he's able to sort of manipulate as he's hacking. But I thought that some of that, including some of that quote unquote realism and functionality in with the character designs, was something that stuck out for this episode too.
Yeah, I think they're still very much the classic versions. Like, you can tell that's Robin, you can tell that's Kid Flash, but yeah, there's a little functionality. Kid Flash, when he's running, he has goggles that he pulls down, red goggles that go over his eyes.
Very Impulse, by the way.
Yes. Very, very cool idea, and it's cool little sequences like that just give you something for your characters, a little extra animation for your characters to do. You didn't have to put that in, but to have that when it's time to go down and Kid Flash is finally free in that part too, and he gets to pull the glasses down and starts running up the stairwell to go meet all of these xenomorphs that are waiting to fight them. Like, it's a cool moment, and yeah, you see they look a little bit more armored up. Aqualad not as much, but you figure him coming from the ocean, he would have a different type of armor
for sure
or gear anyway. And we've already talked about his sort of sword weapon things that he has.
What about, I think the most interesting visual maybe throughout the entire episodes are these xenomorphs, and certainly their designs. And there's I felt like a little bit of Glenn Murakami influence in some of these designs. Some of the way their eyes are shaped reminded me of some Glenn Murakami designs. I think that they're really interesting. There's 3 or 4 different models that they use here. They're these giant, like, troll-like ones, something that you might see out of Lord of the Rings or something like that, these giant creatures. And then there's the sort of the early stage advanced that are like baby, childlike, the ones that sit on the Guardian's shoulder and is sort of responsible for the mind control over him. And then you have this sort of two of them that are sort of middle staged advanced creatures, ones that have these razor sharp claws, and the ones that are a little bit bigger than them, and then of course Double X himself. And one of the things that sort of seems to go throughout, and the way that they communicate visually that these creatures are communicating, is that they have these horns on their head that sort of glow when they're either manipulating or they're communicating to each other telepathically. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think, again, you give a quick verbal explanation of it, but then you just, from there, everything is very much a visual cue. And in that case, of every time when Desmond says something that he wants, when he gives Guardian an order and Guardian starts to talk back to him, you'll see the horns on the one on Desmond's shoulder glow, and then the horns of the xenomorph on Guardian's shoulder glow, and then the Guardian's eyes will get real wide, and then he'll sort of repeat very whatever Desmond wants him to do. So they came up with some very creative ways to get that. The sequence where they're in the ventilation shaft and Robin pulls up the camera system, and you go back and you see all of the xenomorphs crawling very quickly. It felt very horror movie-ish. Like
when Desmond decides to activate all of the xenomorphs in the Cadmus facility, which I thought was a little bit over the top, but he's like, all of you now.
3 children.
And all of these eggs start hatching. That felt like a very like Alien-esque or a horror movie alien invasion where these creatures are hatching as they're coming after them.
Yeah, they had these biological electric insects that are powering the whole facility, because that's another little piece of throwaway dialogue, is like, how could a lab this big be operating without anyone knowing about it? And it's because they have this like weird alternative energy source where they're basically breeding these weird electrical insects to power their whole facility, we see them locked into these tubes as well. So yeah, all of the creature designs in this episode, including sort of the main event here, when we get Desmond's transformation into Blockbuster, I think, are really well done. And it's great. I love the transformation, especially because we actually just talked about the Blockbuster recently because he popped up for a second in an episode of JLU. But he was kind of just Caucasian Hulk, I guess, in the 60s look. Like he's just a big jacked up guy and his clothes are kind of torn. And we kind of see him turn into that version when he drinks the vial of the serum. He goes down, we see him grow massive, and his shirt kind of tears, and you're like, okay, so he's going to look like the Blockbuster. But then he keeps growing, and his flesh begins to tear off, and we see this weird gray and red monstrosity, actually much more like a traditional Hulk-type creature, I guess, or monster-type creature, comes out underneath, and sort of as the battle goes on, more and more of his flesh is torn from his face. At one point, the Kid Flash punches him, and then like has a bunch of skin on his hand afterwards. So yeah, I thought that final transformation of Blockbuster and into that design that's really creative and really, again, very, very body horror there when you start to see the flesh rip and reveal sort of the monster underneath.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely it went from that standard boring sort of weird, odd 60s and 70s design to a certainly a Doomsday-esque or a more villainous monster that seems a little bit more formidable. And when you sort of put up, compare it to the other Xenomorph, because you assume that it's Xenomorph DNA that's being used to almost like spliced into his own DNA. So it would make more sense that he would look like some of these creatures that are running around in the Cadmus facility. So yeah, I think they did a great job with that as well. I thought visuals ended up being certainly the strongest thing that we have here to talk about, and there's a lot. It's funny, Kid Flash also at one point calls him the Incredible Bulk. So obviously we get some nods there to the idea of his model, who he's maybe modeled after. So yeah, I thought the visuals were definitely the strongest here. It won a freaking Emmy for this, so I don't know how I couldn't give it anything but a perfect 10 out of 10.
Yep, and I'm right there with you with my own 10 out of 10. For all the reasons we've already talked about, it's really well done. You're introducing all these new characters, and then on top of it, you get all these really creative monster designs and all that, and introducing all of these classic characters into your style. At the end, when the entire Justice League arrives, we see multiple Green Lanterns, we see Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and Aquaman and Green Arrow, and all these different characters.
Captain Marvel,
Zatara, the Red Tornado, Black Canary we see at the very end of the episode. So they getting to play with it and not having to abide by any embargoes like we've talked about recently that JLU sometimes ran into with certain characters, basically getting to use whoever they wanted. And I think there's so many great moments, and definitely right to focus on the character designs above all else.
I agree, absolutely. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category here, which is going to be music. And as you mentioned at the start of the episode, this is the Dynamic Music Partners who are responsible for this soundtrack, which actually has been released. So we were able to listen to some of this music in isolation, and I would say that was very much a benefit to us this week because, for better or for worse, I think the music sort of takes the back seat to this week's episode.
For sure. It's definitely a building atmosphere. We were talking before we went on the air here. You kind of likened it to Batman Beyond. Not so much electric guitar in that sense, but a lot of this sort of atmospheric music. It's very drum machine and synthesizer focused.
For sure.
Yeah, and a lot of, especially in the first part, it's a lot of them sort of sneaking around this facility in the dark. So it's a lot of like light touches, kind of building that general sense of dread, and are they going to get caught, and like when they start running into the creatures and things like that, and so a lot of it's in the background, but we do get a couple of cool moments where the score really gets to swell. Certainly at the end there, when the Justice League arrives, was probably the standout for me.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's funny, when I was listening to it, when Superman first arrives, it's in the shadows, and as he comes out of the shadows, the music sort of swells, and I think we both remarked as we were listening to it that there's a hint of the Christopher Reeve Superman theme song there, the John Williams Christopher Reeves Superman song that plays as he sort of visually comes out of the darkness and into the light there, and right as into Superboy's visuals. To me, that was the most interesting, and that seemed to be where the music seemed to play up a little bit. There's also maybe a hint, very small hint, allusion to the Batman theme, the Danny Elfman Batman theme. There's a little bit of dark, quote unquote, darkness that comes in. So yeah, I think that those were the highlights, I would say, as far as the music is concerned. But I think because it was so visually interesting and so visually engaging, that the music really didn't need to be very much as far as this episode is concerned. I guess we can talk about the theme song also, since this is the first episode we've covered of that. Thoughts on the theme song?
Yeah, I think it's all right. It's short and sweet. This one does have a little bit of guitar to it, and again, it's very drum focused, very upbeat. I thought you had a pretty funny line about it, which I'll let you get to in a second here. But yeah, I think it's good. It's just it's maybe like 15 or 20 seconds long. We see a couple of clips of original animation mixed with some actual clips from upcoming episodes. So yeah, I think it's fine, but I want you to give the analogy you gave to me.
It sounds very much like the introduction to a like 6 o'clock news program or something like that. Yeah, it's okay, and I just wish it had been a little longer, because I think when it kicks in, it sounds really interesting, and certainly the beginning of it is very interesting as well. But it just sort of peters out, and if you listen to it in isolation, like if I just played it for you, which, let me play it right now. Just playing it doesn't necessarily sound like a superhero theme song. Like,
right.
Imagine like somebody turning towards you with their arms folded, with their name superimposed next to it, like 6 o'clock news with, right, whoever. It's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, it sounds more like that. So that was my thoughts on it. Obviously, I don't know, this being sort of my introduction or reintroduction to the series, I don't know how much music plays into this, and we've talked about sometimes in the differences of the things when we do some of these Elseworlds tales where music isn't as much of an emphasis as it was. And even the DCAU, we know that it was a huge emphasis in Batman the Animated Series, and then the further along we got, even though we have some great musical pieces that are done, it's probably not as much of a focus as it was in that original Batman the Animated Series.
For sure, yeah, it's not quite as much of a character as I think the music often could be. It's less of a driving force. It's more to just add, and again, that's not good or bad. It's just a different storytelling technique.
Correct.
I think. But yeah, it's definitely more focused on just, like we said, adding to whatever the people are talking about or whatever they're experiencing visually. That's just kind of an extra little bit there to. Wow. That's just it. Yeah, it's more there just to add to whatever else is going on in the episode and what the characters are experiencing, rather than kind of being meant to sort of pull focus in the way that sometimes the music and the other shows could.
I agree. Totally agree with you. For all those reasons, Liam, I would say I'm going to give my score for music, which is going to be a respectable 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I'm just a tick higher. I went 7 out of 10. Definitely think it would have been lower if I wasn't able to listen to the score in isolation. So yeah, definitely would love to be able to do that with all of these various cartoons that we look at. So, but yeah, I think there's some good stuff, and it all works in service of what the story they're trying to tell is. So, job well done. Yeah, the music is available as of right now on YouTube. You can go find it. Couldn't find it on Spotify, so you can at least check it out on YouTube. I'm sure you might be able to buy it on through Apple
music also. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. Very excited to talk about this. Of course, we have a huge cast, some notable names also here amongst our voice actors here. Certainly some familiar ones where if you weren't able to immediately identify them right off the bat, you may be surprised to learn, oh yes, that's who that is. Or, yes, I knew I recognized that voice. So who's in our voice cast this week?
Absolutely. It's a big one. We'll start with some of the supporting players and then go to our main cast. We have, briefly, we have Crispin Freeman as Speedy, very over-the-top and angsty, this Speedy, and that sort of comes into play later on in the series. We have, playing his mentor, we have the great Alan Tudyk as Green Arrow.
There you go.
Of course, now, among his many other roles, voices the Joker and Clayface on the Harley Quinn animated series.
Yep.
We have Bruce Greenwood as Batman, who, of course, folks would know from the Batman Under the Red Hood movie, as well as the just released very recently Batman Death in the Family interactive movie short thing, whatever you call that.
Yep.
But he is the voice of Batman in that. He's a pretty solid Batman. He doesn't get a lot to do here, but I think we again, you can hear us talk more about him if you go back and listen to episode 50, I believe, where we reviewed Under the Red Hood. We have, speaking of some familiar faces, we have Phil Lamar pulling double duty. Yes, you may have heard his name once or twice on this show. But Phil Lamar voicing both Aquaman and Double X.
He's great. I'm just going to say it right now. It's a little bit like striking when you hear him as Aquaman. Mm-hmm. But Double X I think is great because it's a unique voice.
Yes, his Aquaman is more just sort of his regular voice with a little bit of like regalness put to it, whereas Double X is more of a traditional character. He gets to sort of flex his acting muscles a little bit more there. We have George Eads as the Flash. Again, not much for him to do in this episode, as well as another familiar face, that being Kevin Michael Richardson, who we see briefly as the Martian Manhunter, who gets to introduce his niece, Miss Martian, played briefly by Danica McKellar. Of course, she will come back much later on in the series and be kind of one of the breakout stars of it. And, then we have our main players for this week. We have Jason Spizak as Kid Flash. I think he's pretty good. Like we said, he probably has the least to do in this episode of anybody. But you kind of get that sense of he's a fine Wally West, cracks some jokes. Ironically, as we said, the Robin character is more impulsive than he is.
Correct.
So that's kind of funny, but we do see him kind of again, he plays more of a comedic foil in this series, but I think he does a solid job. We have former child pop star Jesse McCartney playing Robin.
Heck yeah.
Which is just wild to me. not because he doesn't do a good job. I think he does a fine job. Like we said, this is a very unique take on at least certainly an animation of this version of Dick Grayson. I think he does a fine job with it. He's very he's just kind of a weirdo, but I think he does a good job with it.
Yeah, I think he's fine. And when you told me that, I was like, "What? Are you kidding me? That's an interesting casting. Good for his agent to go out there and outside the box when he's probably out there looking to do anything."
But Disney Channel checks stop coming in, you get
I mean, good for him though.
Yes.
I don't think I'd be interested to see how it evolves as the series goes on, because I believe that the series ends up taking some dark twists and turns in various areas. So certainly interested in hearing how that vocal performance evolves
for sure. And then our other two Young Justice members, we have Carrie Payton playing Aqualad, who of course voices Cyborg on Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, sort of the definitive voice of that character, as well as, of course, he's now live action. He's on The Walking Dead and several other things. It's interesting because, again, he has a very recognizable voice, even though this Aqualad voice doesn't sound anything like his Cyborg. But you can still kind of tell it's him.
For sure.
And he's sort of playing this character who's a lot more reserved and less...
He's not quippy.
Right.
He's not goofy.
He's the eyes on the prize guy, and sort of later on in the series, that's kind of, I think, why they push Aqualad into becoming sort of the team leader rather than Robin. And you kind of see that's on display here. It's not that he doesn't do a good job, but I think this is one where I just so strongly identify him as the voice of Cyborg that it's kind of weird whenever he's playing anybody else, but especially I think another teenage superhero.
Especially one that's so, again, that you mentioned, that's so straight-laced, because you're used to the wisecracks and the, if you've watched any of Teen Titans Go, or even, Teen Titans Go turns it up to 11, but even in the actual Teen Titans show, he was still the quippy sort of goofball,
loud, gung-ho, fists flying, one-liner guy. Yeah.
Exactly. So for when I first heard this performance, I was like, man, I know that voice. Who is that? And I knew it wasn't Phil LaMarr, because Phil LaMarr was the other voice. And then I was like, oh, that's Cyborg's voice. And once you hear it, it's like, I can't unhear it anymore. It's not bad. It's just, we've talked about it before in the past, when you can't unhear things sometimes. It's just, it's like you so readily identify him as that other character that when he does do another character, even if it's certainly a very different character, it's hard to unmarry that voice, if you know what I mean.
For sure. And then wrapping up our cast here, we have, speaking of distracting voices, we have Nolan North voicing both Superboy and Superman. And I just want to get this out of the way. He is a fantastic voice actor. He's done, if you have played a video game in the last 25 years, you have heard Nolan North's voice, almost definitely. Most famously, he is the voice of Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series. Yeah, also has great range. He plays the Penguin in the Batman Arkham games. Like, he has quite a bit of range, but he basically just, for this role as Superboy, does his regular Nolan North voice, basically his Nathan Drake voice.
Yep.
A little pitched up because he's playing a younger character, but it's very distracting to me that it's Nolan North, because I've played so many video games where Nolan North is the main voice, or one of the main voices. So, again, not at all saying he doesn't do a good job, but it is very distracting to me.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not as much of I play video games, but I'm not as much of a video game guy as you. But I knew I recognized the voice from somewhere, and it was It was another one of those where even me not being a huge video game guy, it was still distracting, because I'm like, where have I heard that voice before? It's so distinct and so unique. And then when you mentioned that it was Drake from Uncharted, I was like, oh, yes, I absolutely recognize that now. So yeah, I totally agree with you. He's obviously a fantastically talented voice actor with the ability to do great performances, but he's a little bit over the top, I think it's fair to say. So very, very, very distracting.
For sure. Yeah, again, not that it's a bad job, but yeah, especially I think in that when he's sort of doing the thing where he's struggling to sort of reprogram himself, and he has Aqualad talking to him, and he has Double X in his head and all that stuff. Like, he's a little bit over the top with it. And obviously, again, we've got an entire series worth of time for him to sort of figure out that role and perfect it and everything. But like I said, just on this occasion, listening to it for after not really thinking about it for a long time, and as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, that's Nolan North. That's going to be distracting. And again, not his fault that he has such a recognizable voice, or that I've played so many video games. But overall, like I said, I still think it's a very solid, strong voice cast, and I actually gave voice acting an 8 out of 10.
Nice. I went just a tick lower than you, and I actually gave it a 7 out of 10. I think with so much that's done in this episode, again, we talked about it being the pilot, so there's a lot happening here. There's a lot of voices, and we're still kind of getting to learn these characters. It'll be interesting to see going forward, if we cover more episodes in the future, which I imagine that we may, how these characters develop, and how their voice acting skills are kind of able to shine in different ways, especially with some of these other characters that end up getting introduced. So.
Absolutely, and I nearly neglected to mention him, but we of course have the great Rene Auberjonois as Mark Desmond / the Blockbuster, who of course, as we mentioned, has done quite a few voices over the years on various DC animation, and course, was on Boston Legal and 100 other television shows. So I think he does a good job. Again, a very over-the-top villain, but for such a kind of outlandish story, I think it was fine to have him be sort of the over-the-top mad scientist dealing with everything. So yeah, I think everyone, like I said, everyone does a good job, even the ones that I found distracting for different personal reasons.
Perfect. All right, Liam, let's tally up our scores here at the end. And tallying everything up here, I end up with a 30 out of 40. What about you?
And my final score is just a little bit higher there, Cal. I have a 32 out of 40.
All right, Liam, so I guess we talk about rewatchability, and it's interesting because, we always struggle with that when it comes to the Elseworlds tales here. I think sometimes we should consider maybe even when it comes to an Elseworlds just giving it a straight-up recommendation. Do you recommend checking this out? Obviously, with a cult following that this has certainly garnered, and just certainly, I would say the lack of current DC animation projects other than the direct-to-video, which those are kind of a watch it once or twice, and there's not really, you don't have the binge option like you would with a Netflix show with something like that. Right. So with that being the case with Young Justice, and especially I think this us overall enjoying this episode, I would give this give it a check it out. I don't know that I'm going to watch this 10 more times or something like that, like I would one of our standard DCAU show episodes, but I would recommend people check it out. If you haven't seen it yet, give it a shot. If you've been on the fence, check it out, give it a try. What about you?
Yeah, I would say so. I think you give it a chance. You see if it grabs you. If it doesn't grab you, then you can always move on. But yeah, I think this, like I said, this first 2 parts has a lot of moving parts to it. It's very action packed. It's not boring. And it kind of gives you the lay down of what kind of the whole show is going to be about, and sort of where the jumping off point for the rest of the series will be. So yeah, I think it's worth at least watching these first 2 episodes and giving it a shot.
Agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for checking us out. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or if you want to, you can always check out episodes every week at DCAUreview.com, where you can also check out the archives. You can also check out our shop, which is on DCAUreview.com. If you want to support the podcast, get yourself a shirt, a hat, a hoodie, do something to support the podcast since we don't sell ads here. Don't forget, you can also leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you don't mind. Let the good people at home know what you like about the program. Liam, we like to do things big here, and we haven't... I'll start this off by saying we haven't had a lot of guests on this program. Going back 130 episodes plus our 13 or so bonus episodes, we've had one guest.
That's right.
In those 143 episodes. But I dare say that coming up next week, this is the biggest guest we may ever have on this program.
Very likely, yes. We will be returning to the world of Batman the Animated Series and the DCAU proper. Of course, we review those episodes in order, so we'll be picking up where we left off with a huge episode, one of the tentpoles of the entire series, Almost Got Him. And reviewing it with us will be the colorist for the Batman The Adventures Continue series, as well as plenty of other DC Comics work and comic book work in general. Monica Kubina will be joining us, best friend of the show. She will be joining us next week to review the episode with us, and we can't wait.
Our special correspondent, only the second one we've ever had. We're super excited and super fortunate to be able to have her on. And we're not just going to do a standard interview because that's not really our style here, but she's been gracious enough to agree to watch Almost Got Him, and then she's going to review the episode along with us as a special guest correspondent. I cannot wait.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be awesome. So you will not want to miss that. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. But until next week, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.